Welcome back to Tech Beyond Gender. I'm your host, Meena Satishkumar. Today, we have the pleasure of introducing our guest, Kirti Desai. Kirti Desai is a General Manager of Digital Data and Technology at Procare and serves on the Tech Advisory Board at Tech Accelerate. Our paths crossed briefly at Westpac, where we shared stories over coffee and lunch, although we didn't get a chance to work closely together. It's been a while since we last caught up, and our careers have taken different directions since then. This makes it a perfect opportunity to have a conversation about her journey in tech and her experiences as a woman of color. Kirti's multicultural background adds another layer to her unique story, with her father being from Africa, her mother from India, and she herself being born in England. Welcome, Kirti. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me, Meena. It's been a long time, so I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Now, can you introduce yourself and share a bit about your current role and responsibilities in the tech industry?
So I've been in New Zealand now for just over 12 years, so coming up to 13 years nearly. So I've been here a long time now. And when I first kind of moved over to New Zealand, I wasn't actually in tech. So I was kind of touching tech, if that makes sense. I was working in kind of product development and then working across kind of projects that all linked back to some form of technology. So whether it was, moving things from an advisor perspective and taking people away from, I don't know if people remember this, but when I first joined New Zealand insurance brokers were still using CD-ROMs as a way to upgrade their software. So the banks were sending out these CDs for insurance brokers to update software. And I'd never seen anything like it because in the UK, we'd moved, a lot of things had moved online or downloadable links. So that was one of the first big projects. And that was kind of where I think I was already moving into it. And in the UK, I had spent quite a lot of time in working within kind of e-commerce space. So, introducing internet banking or websites, web experiences, and then, also moving towards kind of that digital tap and go technology, which, now is like, contactless payments. But the first versions of those in the UK. So when I came to New Zealand, I was doing a lot in the product development space. And I think when I met you, Meena, I was at Westpac in the product team, and then I moved into digital. And that was actually my big break into kind of moving and having a pathway into digital services, because I was so focused on the customer side, which is what you get from doing product development, is you have to understand the customer to be able to develop products and services to meet those needs. And then you also look at that end to end from a marketing perspective and propositions. So that was kind of my first foot in into that space, was kind of at Westpac, getting into that digital space. And then, along the way, my career's expanded even further. And now for the last probably seven or 8 years, I've been at kind of that CIO level and working in the C-suite and working with CEOs and having to kind of actually lead teams in that technology transformation space. So I would say, rather than a true tech person where I don't code, I'm very much in that strategic business transformation. How do we diversify our revenue by using technology as an enabler? And I would say that's kind of the space that I focus on, and that's the space that I'm in. So my role at Procare is GM for digital data and tech. So I'm responsible for quite a big team, and the team works across all of ICT technology. They also look after data and analytics. So our data warehouse engineering and the analytics reporting through Power BI. And then as well as that, we also run projects and digital transformation programs of work. So we work alongside the business to deliver them, either whether it's we're kind of trying to enhance the existing services that we offer and improving the technology, or whether it's part of kind of that whole transformation program around removing legacy systems and moving them into more cloud-based and future focus. And then the other part of my role, obviously, when you're looking after ICT type stuff, is cybersecurity, which, that's a growing area for every organization. And so, you know, my team is also responsible for that across our business, but also we provide services to our member services, which is through our network for general practices. So yeah, it's quite a breadth of role in that sense. It's quite a meaty area.
Kirti, I'm just so impressed. I think the last we met was in 2016 in Westpac. And you were actually, I think, in the home loans team in the product development space, if I remember.
Yeah.
And now, listening to you about all the different teams that you are managing, from data warehousing to analytics to security and all that stuff. Oh my God, my head spins. Like, how did you manage to get to this leadership position, one? And also, like, did you actually face any sort of imposter syndrome when you just started off with this role?
Oh, 100%. So not as much probably in this role, but the first role. So at Westpac, by the time I left, I was their director for digital sales. So had already moved into that digital team. So I guess that was the beauty of Westpac, was that, you know, one of the first things when I first got there was I got a mentor, and that some of that was me really pushing for it. But secondly, it was also then through an introduction. So, you know, the chief digital officer at the time started mentoring me while I was still in the product team. And that really kind of was my kind of catalyst and opened my eyes to, I was really, really inspired by his vision and the visionary way that he would talk about technology. And I think that was kind of the thing that really made me want to make a difference, was listening to him really kind of talk about, he empowers people. And I think that really resonated with me. He had a vision, and he enabled you to kind of believe that you could do whatever it was to get there. Like, you know, why could you not be in the digital team if that's really where you want to be? And all your skills are transferable skills. And that was huge. I think having somebody that believes in you, and I think that makes a difference. So I've probably been quite proactive and lucky in the sense that I've always pushed to have a mentor. I've always pushed to have more than one, and find people in the organization, either whether it's because I want to grow in certain areas, or whether it's because it's an area I want to get into. So finding people that I can work alongside or feel inspired by has always been something that I look for. And then I will ask for it. So even in my one-to-ones, I would always say I'm looking for a mentor. And, you know, some managers are really proactive and they try to help you find somebody in the organization. Others kind of are a little bit like, oh, because they wouldn't have one. And I've come across both, right? Some people don't have a mentor, so they don't understand it when you say, I'd like to have a mentor, because they think that's their role. But your manager isn't the same as somebody mentoring you, if that makes sense. So when I first went into the roles, once I left Westpac, my first role was as Chief Growth Officer for QV. And no, actually it wasn't. It was for Paymark. God, I missed Paymark in the middle. And I went in as a kind of like business transformation. And that's what I went into. That one, I used a lot of my transferable skills for. A lot of the stuff that I'd learned in product, a lot of the things that I had learned about leadership from the people around me. But I also wanted to learn. So that was the other thing. I didn't need to have all of the skill sets. I needed to be okay with the fact that I was going to learn. And that is the hard thing, when you realize that you are also learning. And it's important that you actually open up to the fact that I don't have to have all the answers. I can ask people questions in my team if I'm not sure, because if I have all the answers, why are they there? You know, like I don't want to tell people what to do. I want to take that knowledge and ask them questions and empower them to own it, which along the way is what people have done for me, right? I learned along the way, and people taught me, and there was a lot of skills I had. So they didn't have to have the answers. They relied on the fact that I would go and get it done. And I would go and find out how to do it, and I would use my own initiative to work through it. And if I needed help, then I would go and ask for it. So then I guess when you get to a leadership position, why would you now start to tell people what to do when actually that's how you learn? So I think that was the big thing for me, was accepting that I didn't have to have all the answers, and actually then learning to say, when I didn't have it, didn't know, that I actually said, I'm not sure about that. And I will come back and I'll let you know. I'm going to double check.
Nice.
I think my hardest lesson, if I'm 100% honest with you, was when I first went into tech and being in probably those first teams, not even just in New Zealand, but even in England, in the first, even when I was in product and I worked with technology teams, a lot of them were men. There wasn't many women in those teams. In England, there was probably a lot more than when I first came to New Zealand. There wasn't, even today, there is a lot more, and it's a growing space, and definitely more than it has been. But in some organizations where I've worked, there's not really been any women. And when you then go in and you're trying to lead a transformation program, and the people that you now need to actually do it, or you need to get through like an architectural working group or any of those things. And I remember in one of the meetings, somebody actually said to me, shall we draw you a picture? Because you might not understand this, because I was the only woman in the room. And my response to that was, no, why don't I show you what I understood from that, and I'll draw you the picture. And the reason for that was because he annoyed me so much, because it was so rude. And secondly, because I thought, there in no world is that okay for you to say that to me. It's never okay for somebody to say that to you. Because what made him think that I didn't understand? Because I was female. Or I'm not sure what else it could have been that he would think that I didn't understand. Maybe because he thought that I didn't have a technology background, so maybe I don't understand. But that changed the conversation. We never had conversations like that very often again. Sometimes it would be in an indirect way, but each time I learned to kind of just nip it in the bud and be very clear about the fact that, well, actually I do know. And if I didn't know something, I remember in those early meetings, I learned so much about architecture. I actually went and researched it myself so that I would go to these meetings really prepared, because I realized what kind of people I had to work with that would try to put me down in different ways. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to learn it myself, or going to talk to other colleagues who weren't like that, to try and kind of learn my way through it, so that I could be way more knowledgeable when I went to those meetings, so that somebody actually couldn't find a fault in kind of my thinking. And that's when I also realized that we've got a long way to go. There's still a long way to go.
Yeah, this is awesome. And also, what I really admired about you is the fact that you went out looking for mentors yourself, right? So having those formal mentor relationships. And it's also interesting that you did have male mentors in the early stages of your careers, even though there were not many female around. Do you think it really matters about the gender of mentor you have? Because in certain sectors, for instance, in certain technical roles, like it could be in security teams or network teams, there are more, there's like very obvious underrepresentation of women in those areas. And I feel it's probably easier for a woman to get a male mentor than a female mentor. But then it has its ups and downs. So what would be your insight into having a mentor? Is it good to have the same gender mentors, or is it perfectly fine to have a male mentor?
I actually would say, when I first started out, my very first mentor was a female. And that was because we connected. Like, there was a connection. She was super smart. I actually really admired her for the way that she leads people. That was one of the biggest reasons. And she found me a male mentor in addition, because she said the best way for you to learn and grow is, it's not about having, it wasn't necessarily about the gender, it was actually about saying certain roles are male dominated. So having a male mentor that can help you and sees past the gender helps to open doors too. And she was very right. I learned a lot from my mentors over the years, both male and female, because what I've learned from, I guess, people think that men probably don't have the same challenges in some ways, and they do. They have similar challenges along the way. It's, in some ways, it might be equally hard because there's a lot of, I guess, competition. And so, sometimes it feels more cutthroat for them, actually. And whereas for women, and you get that still with women as well, it's very competitive as well. And not all women will help each other up that ladder. Right. And unfortunately, that is the situation. But you'd hope that more will try to go, actually, let's just, we've all been there. So how do we open more doors for each other? But I actually think having equal male and female, they bring different strengths to the table, and they give you a different perspective on different situations, and also having a mentor not always in the field that you're in. So, I've had some mentors, it's been about leadership, or it's been about, and actually be okay with having more than one person. There's been some times in my life where I've had multiple people, and then, and those mentors might not always be professional people. They can be role models, they can be people in your family, they can be, people that that really inspire you and you learn a lot from. So for me, I think, and this is probably goes back to our culture as well a little bit, because for me, I do really look up to, the females in my home. And I think of my sisters, and I think of my mom, and I think of my cousins, and then male and female, I kind of look around and go, I've got some really strong role models of people that actually have pushed boundaries and done things. And I learn from them all the time, right? And our culture actually is broader than sometimes our own family, it's our communities. So you're learning from those places as well, not just your work environment. Your work environment teaches you a lot. But I do think it's important to have a balance of both male and female, because I think they bring a lot of different skills to the table.
Great. What were some of the key challenges you faced as a woman of color in the tech industry, and how did you overcome them?
I think in New Zealand, one of the things that surprised me probably a lot, probably even early on in my career when I first came here, was people, because of the accent and the fact that it sounds, well, it's British accent, didn't notice that I was a person of colour. And that in itself, I found very interesting, because and this is probably where I actually think that I feel sad by it, because it had benefits in some ways, and it had quite negative impact on me in a different way. So the benefit was, I guess, that if they didn't see your colour, then you kind of get treated a lot more like everybody else. And therefore, actually, you don't get the prejudice that people might have. However, when they don't see you as a person of colour, they think that it's okay to say certain things in front of you that they might not say if they realise that you were a person of colour, if that makes sense. So I remember being in a meeting where somebody said that they wouldn't give a female Indian girl a role because of her accent. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, oh, well, I don't think that she's going to be able to do it. And they weren't prepared to put her forward for the role. And I remember sitting in that room and I said, but I'm Indian. And they said, no, you're different. And I found that really hard, because that's somebody from my background, somebody that I don't look at people's colour, don't really pay that much attention to, it's about their skill set. You shouldn't really care what they sound like unless their role is, that is a big part of their role, right? But regardless, if they can speak the language, they're working in that area and they've got the skills and the capability, then what is the problem? But this was nothing to do with skills and capability. It was fully about somebody's accent and their background. And then the fact that then they didn't see me the same, I found really difficult, because I actually had to sit there and listen to somebody degrade somebody else who was of the same background as me.
Mm.
And I think that's hard. I think that's really hard. I think it's, I think we're coming a long way. I still think there's room for improvement. I think that sometimes, people look at people's names and, like today, I think I've mentioned this to you before, but today you called me Kirti, which is how my name is pronounced with my family and at home and in my culture. But that isn't how my name is pronounced at work. And that is also because growing up in England, it was really hard growing up where the teacher can't say your name. And you're always kind of feeling a little bit like, oh, nobody can pronounce this name. And actually my parents would always say to me, it's such a beautiful name. And I would always go home going to school thinking, oh God, I want to change this name because nobody can pronounce it. So I've changed it to Kirti. I changed that a long time ago when I think I was probably about 6. And I went to school and the teacher couldn't pronounce it. And in the end, I just changed the way I pronounced it myself, because I just couldn't, it was just too much in the classroom, at school. And so ever since then, wherever I have gone to work, from the minute that they meet me in an interview or they ask me how to pronounce my name, I always tell them it's Kirti, because they cannot say it. And that's okay. And, there's certain names and pronunciations I can't say as well. But it was a conscious thing. But I have met people that have come for interviews and they've changed their name fundamentally. So, their name might be Mahesh, but they'll call themselves Mike. And on their CV, they will say Mike. And so when you put some of these people come to an interview and then they've completely changed their name. And that is because they feel that they won't get invited to an interview or they won't be given a role because of their background.
Are there any specific initiatives or programs you have been involved in to promote diversity and inclusion within your organization or tech community at large?
So at ProCare, we're pretty multicultural, and our team and across the business, it is a very multicultural business. We, try to improve equity for healthcare. So I think that then translates into the way that we employ people, in the way that we want everyone to feel like they can bring their whole selves to work. And especially like for me in my team, I always say to people that bring all aspects of yourself to work, because your skill set is everything that makes you, really. So don't feel shy about, bringing that to work, because that's who you are. And, that's why we employed you. And we want to know you, because that's what it's about. When I think of broadening that, I'm part of Women in Tech. And I have been for a number of years since I was at Westpac. But then also, I think in the UK, I did a lot more in that kind of South Asian space, because they actually have a lot more kind of opportunities for it to be set up. I think here now, this is why I was so excited about what you're doing, because this, I think, is the first time I've seen it to be anything that is yes, it is about women and it is about gender and, you know, everybody's inclusive. But I also think it's about people of colour having a space to come together and talk. And there isn't really that many forums for that. So what I've been doing is probably every like event and conference and places that I go to, it's really interesting. A lot of women in colour tend to come to talk to me after I've talked at an event or I've been on a panel, and they will want to meet up and they'll ask me about how I got there and, you know, have I got any advice for them, or is there anybody I could introduce them to? And that's good. And I've kept in touch with quite a lot of people along the years that, you know, I can help and introduce them to other people, because I guess that's the doors that people did for me, that I think if we can do that for others, that makes a big difference. Because that's what helps build communities, and in workplaces and outside. And that's why I really like what you're doing, Meena, here, because this is a really great platform now for everybody, right? Regardless of background, gender, race, it doesn't matter. This is a forum for people to come together that are like-minded, that enjoy being in tech, but also want to make a bit of a change in the sector so that it is more inclusive. And sometimes the prejudice of the sector isn't even about gender. It isn't even about colour or any of those things. It's actually about whether you have got a computer science degree, or you have got a different skill set, which I have found even more fascinating since I've come into tech, because it's like there is an assumption that if you didn't do a actual technical degree, that you couldn't possibly understand technology. Well, actually, if you look at technology today, you don't need to have a computer science degree. And going forward, I think less and less people will need it.
Yeah, wow, this is actually quite interesting, right? So what would be your suggestion for women who might consider changing their career to technology? So they could be a nurse or a teacher, not necessarily having the qualification in technology. So from your perspective, do you think it's easy enough, or they could take a leap?
Yeah, I think you would need to have a real passion for understanding which part of technology you're interested in, right? So for me, it was the strategic, it was the being really clear. I like to drive change. I've done projects. So that's kind of like, I love to see how technology enables the future. And it's that kind of customer lens feeding back in and using technology more as an enabler. Other people, it is actually the coding, or it's actually kind of building systems and programs. And so I would say, if you're in a different sector, regardless of what it is, have a think about what it is that you like about technology and what it is that you think you'd like to be involved in. And have you got a passion for it? Because you're in a profession because there's something about it, right, that you like. I would not fundamentally change my career unless I actually, because you have to do this all day, every day, right? It takes up so much of your time. You need to be excited by it. You need to be passionate by it, because you then want to put focus on it. So have a think about your transferable skills. Which part of technology? It's so broad now. I actually think there's a place for everybody within it, because technology is now touching science, it's now touching healthcare, it's now touching education, it's touching so many different sectors. We need people from those sectors to work with people that are true tech people, because we'll be using technology to enable other professions and other sectors. So it isn't an isolation thing anymore, like we've got a laptop and we've got a computer. It's fully embraced in our day-to-day living now. So there's actually more opportunities, I think, for women and all people to get into this. If you are not in technology, there's no better time. If you're excited and interested in it, I've met a number of people, especially in health, that are doctors they've just got a bit of an excitement for technology. They've got a bit of a passion for it, and they want to use technology to make healthcare more accessible. And how else can you do that? You can use technology and create health tech, and we can empower people more. So there is a growing trend towards doctors and nurses being part of working groups, now working more collaboratively in those with tech teams. And we do it, and I'm sure lots of organisations are doing the same thing, regardless of whether you're a teacher or whatever you are. Everyone's going to need technology in some way. So I actually think the time is now. And if you really do have a passion for being in technology, then why not find a mentor, go and find out a little bit about what do you need, what skill sets do you need, which part of technology interests you, so that you can actually think about, how do I get there? And having conversations with the broad skill sets of people, so where you can network, so you can understand, can I move into this in different ways? That would be my advice, because I would say there is no better time.
Cool. So, and also you touched on the fact that when you go out in public forums and when you speak, there are several women of color who approach you and talk to you about how you got to the position where you are now, right?
Yeah.
What is the advice? Like, what is a secret ingredient Kirti had or implemented to get to this position?
I would say it's real clear focus. But I have always been quite clear about wanting to get the next role and ambition. I'd say to get into tech, for me, I was passionate. I was very passionate about making a difference, and I wanted to learn. And that's what brought me into this. I was excited by the innovation of technology and the things that it could do and how it could improve people's way of living, in all aspects. And I guess that's come from those early years of working in banking in the UK, when internet banking was coming in, and not everybody wanted it. I remember the number of complaints we got about certain things, because we made them internet only, from customers, because they weren't ready. You imagine if we took internet banking away today, how many complaints would you get then? So sometimes it's, the world might not be fully ready, and they might not be ready. But what I realized then is the future was still coming. The world, even though all of those people were not quite ready, we still had to evolve, and we still had to move. And we still had to think differently, and you need those people that think differently. And I think for me, it was that's what's really been my big push. And I think this is why it's really, really good to understand you. I went on a really great course when I was in the UK, very early on in my career, which got me to assess myself and the things that give me energy. What is it that makes you enjoy what you do? And I've been on one recently through work that have sent us on a similar course, and it's a great course, because what it does is it helps you it's a very quick assessment, helps you to understand the things that give you energy and the things that don't. And that means that you will always focus on the things that make you feel good, right? Where you are excited, you want to learn. And if you stay in those areas, because you spend 90% of your time there, then actually you put more in, and it doesn't drain you. Whereas if you're spending most of your time working in an area you don't want to be in, then all it's doing is draining you. It's draining you, and it's making you not want to be there, which means you can't focus. You can't focus on your next step because you don't want to be there already. So I think that was the thing for me, is I've kind of always been a little bit more career focused, in the sense of thinking, where do I want to be, and actually what do I like about this? So it wasn't always about staying in product. I felt like I'd got to where I wanted to be. I really enjoyed it, but I started to really enjoy sideways steps in to kind of that tech space. And so that for me was kind of, I loved customer journeys and understanding customers. So I was like, actually, that's what I want to do. And so a few sideways steps, it's okay to take a sideways step. honestly. And I think a lot of people think that it's a negative. I never see it as negative. You don't have to keep going up. You can go across to go up. And actually taking those sideways steps sometimes helps you to work out where you want to be. And once you then know where you want to be, it's a lot easier to go further up. I think that for me was definitely, once I knew where I wanted to be, I was much happier because I started to really enjoy what I did a lot more. And I could use the skills that I've learned along the way, but once I was enjoying it more, the energy came with it and the momentum. I would say that's one of the big things. And then again, somebody early in my career also said to me, and this was after I graduated, was don't be afraid to, in your early years, you should be moving a minimum of every 18 months to your next role. So after a year, you should start thinking about, okay, what have I learned? Am I going to be doing anything different? And whether it's in the same organization or somewhere else, do not become stale. Think about where you want to be next. And that was the best advice they gave me early on, because it meant I made myself change each 18 months. And that meant that, that really pushed me to constantly learn, even in the same organization. Don't get me wrong, you don't have to leave, but put your hand up for opportunities, secondments, say that you'll be part of a working group on something. That's how I got into tech early on in those project teams. When they were looking for in-house people to do this alongside your day job. There's all those projects, every organization does them. They can't employ lots of external people, so they'll always say, oh, this is a great opportunity for somebody. I put my hand up. And yes, the hours were a bit longer, and yes, but if I hadn't done that, I would never have got that ground level understanding. Who else was going to give me a foot through the door to let me have a go in an area I didn't know? Your existing company will always do that, because in some ways that it's a win-win. So sometimes you have to put yourself out there a little bit to be able to get those early opportunities, because they're the ones that then you've got for your CV for when you want to go for those other roles.
So as you transitioned to these roles and kept climbing up the ladder in technology, did you face microaggressions at all in your career?
Yes, you do. In every career you do, right? I think you get a lot of some people that don't believe in you, people that try to knock you down along the way. And this is why I was saying to you about knowing who you are is very important, so that you can have a belief, like I have a strong belief system. And I think that's really helped me, because there's been some awful moments along the way where, it's people have either tried to make me feel that I don't know, knocked my decision making, done things that have felt like it's been behind my back, not to my face. So that, and you get all these politics in organizations as well, right? Where people, tend to try to knock you down a little bit along the way, because then they build their career off your back kind of situation. I think for me, a lot of it has been about having a good support network of people outside of work, but also in work. And I think outside of work, I would say, like, my family have always been a bit of a rock for me. So it doesn't matter what happens, that they're the kind of people that I know, they know me. So if the world is throwing stones at you, I've got somewhere safe to go. And they'll be honest, if I'm in the wrong, then I'm in the wrong, right? So, but at the same time, they're also there to kind of make sure that, they kind of help me through those difficult situations. But then also at work, having somebody that you can confide in, I think makes a big difference to you. And I think for me, I think some of it was about gender. Some, like I said to you, sometimes people, because they'd forget that I was Indian, they would say things in front of me that actually was unacceptable, because they wouldn't say that because it's fine that you know, it's not fine actually that they've got prejudice, or that there is an element of race that, you know, certain races they wouldn't push up the career ladder. So this is where I said to you it was a blessing and a bit of a curse having an English accent, because they didn't see my colour because of the accent, then some of the roles I got when I went for them. Whereas I genuinely, as I saw some stuff along the way, I realised that maybe I wouldn't have got that role had I had a non-British accent, and actually had they looked and realised that I was a person of colour, because it does make me question whether then they would have looked at that versus the skills and capability. And that's the bit that makes me sad and frustrates me, because that means that we have to fight harder to get to that table. And that means that once you're there, you can't be silent. You have to break down barriers, and you have to help build organisations where you empower and you don't, you know, educate people on when that's not acceptable.
Yeah, what you just said so resonated with some of the experiences I've had in my career.
You
From
found
your
it quite challenging too?
Yeah. But a lot of the times I sort of gone into this phase of internalizing my experience, thinking maybe it's something wrong at my end, maybe I should do it different, or maybe I don't know or understand the culture enough to be able to socialize. Um, a whole lot of stuff. So I think a lot of women do internalize their experiences and just start to think about, okay, is there something that I could have done different? And I think it's more so with women of color, because of the culture and the background we come from as well, where we sort of tend to give too much respect to authority. And we respect the hierarchical structure a lot more. And we just feel that we need to abide by what is being expected of us. A lot of the times we don't really know what is expected of us. And it, as you mentioned, it could definitely be a racial discrimination. But because of our upbringing, we sort of tend to ignore that aspect and start to think about what should I do better, right? So I remember, like, even now to date, because of that, even to date, if I have to go out to work, and if I would like to have a dot in between, in my forehead, in between my eyebrows, I would hesitate because of the fear of being judged. Will I actually convey a message that is going to be very strong, that I'm coming from this specific culture or not, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the times I feel I have internalized it a lot, and I've seen many others internalize it, which means that we sort of change the way we dress, even though our dressing preferences could be different. We just try and abide by whatever needs to be done. So we just sort of feel, well, accent is going to be an issue anyway, but at least try and pretend that you are making an effort to fit into the culture. Yeah.
You're right. And I think, you know, I think here, everywhere, I think when I was growing up, we have that constant battle with this, with, I guess, the battle of a Western culture and an Asian culture. And they're two different cultures. And, you know, we're brought up one way, and then our professional lives and our working lives are different. So I think we end up being kind of like two different people, if I'm honest. I think that's just something that ends up happening, because And it starts from when you're young. So I think for me, growing up in England, I would say that definitely happened because we had these, Indian cultural things, and our weekends were jam-packed full of lots of big family events and religious things and, lots going on in communities and whatever. But then at school, there was very few people in those early years that had similar backgrounds. So you kind of, and they would go to each other's houses, but I never really felt like I needed to go to anybody else's house because we had such a big family. So, and it never really bothered me that I did go to people's houses or have play dates or whatever, because I didn't need them. But to be honest, I didn't need them. We had such a big family that we grew up together. There was a lot of us, family, friends, and all, an extended community. Kind of had friends, but in those early years, especially when I was a lot younger, didn't really, like today you hear about people having play dates and, the parents will take their children and then even like as I got older, I think I was probably in my teens when I first had a sleepover, and even that was a big deal, to have a sleepover at a friend's house. But all my friends before had been doing that for a long, long time. But that was pretty big for my parents, and I think we have this from a young age through to adulthood. So when we go to places in the workplace, we continue with this. How do you bring it together? Because you're still only one person, right? It's one person that's got these two contrasting, sometimes they complement each other, and sometimes they're quite contrasting parts of you. In some ways, right, of all of us, right? And I think that's the bit that I still think, it's how do we bring it together? How do we find a way? I think workplaces have got a lot better. There's so much more inclusive, we celebrate a lot more cultural events now in workplaces than we've probably ever done, I would say. You see like pretty much every culture being represented. And that's a massive growth space, like that's all of us bringing that to the table. Every time we've gone to a workplace, somebody has talked about it or explained it or has educated other people, or, they've come up with the idea, why don't we do this? And that's helped bridge that gap that little bit more, which then means that we can be a bit more of ourselves in the workplace. And then that encourages others to then ask us questions, and for us to ask others questions about, their cultural backgrounds. And I think if you fast forward it to between 3 to 5 years from now, it'll evolve again. We'll be in a much better place. People will be more aware of each other, more respectful of other faiths and communities and backgrounds and cultures. And I see that. I think since I first came in the 12 and a half years, I would say New Zealand has 100% in the workplaces that I've worked at. You can see it more and more. That, and I feel like it, especially in the last probably 3 years or whatever, there's been a real momentum of change in that space. I don't know what's your take on that, Meena?
I think so too. I think so. But at the same time, I do feel like at work, right? Like I do see contrasting differences in behaviors. I think being a woman is a different story in tech, and being a woman of color is a double whammy, right?
Yeah.
And I feel there's definitely an impact in the self-confidence level displayed by women of color compared to the other peers in the team. And organizations are making effort to celebrate different cultures these days. But I'm not too sure what can be done other than acknowledging certain differences, right? I don't know, Kirti, have you faced any, I'm sure in your career, especially with recruitment, have you noticed any differences in the confidence levels displayed by women of color during the recruitment processes compared to others? And if so, what do you think contributes to these differences? And how can organizations better support and empower these candidates so they can actually express their fullest self?
So I think there's probably a few things there. So yes, I have definitely seen that there can be a difference. And I think some of that depends on how long somebody has been in this country. I think that makes a big difference. So if they have only been here a few years, you definitely see in the interview a nervousness. They struggle with some of the questions. And the reason that they struggle with some of the questions is because the interview technique is different. It's that cultural difference, right? Secondly, I think if there's a couple of people in the room, it seems to throw people a little bit in those interviews. And I don't know whether it's a confidence thing. And women tend to not overly brag about their skills and their experience. So what I definitely find in those interviews is I have to really kind of coax it out. Like, what was your role? What did you do? And trying to make them feel a little bit more comfortable at the beginning of the interview. How did you get here? And, how long, and getting them to talk a little bit about themselves. So how long have you been here? And talk to me about your career, and, getting them to open up a little bit, because otherwise what you get is somebody who's shyer, I think. And there is this, because I think it's this hierarchical thing of, like I get it. There's a couple of people I still get this with sometimes in teams that I've led, where the culture in the cultural way of working in other countries, they wouldn't talk to their managers or their manager, so a senior leader in the team. Therefore, if I talk to them, it's a big thing. And I do these coffee catch-ups with everybody in my team. So whether they report to me directly or through somebody else in my team, I do a coffee catch-up with everybody in my team. And that gives them an opportunity to me to find out more about them. We talk about, it doesn't have to be about work, it could be about anything. And I'll normally kind of open it up with some generic questions, ask them about their families, like their children, or, how are they finding things? And what I tend to find is they are shocked that I'm talking to them, and that I've taken them for a coffee, or that I have this meeting with them. And that shouldn't be a shock, but that's because that wouldn't happen in the kind of other countries that they've worked in. That wouldn't be the case. And so because that is what the difference is, that's made me kind of go, okay, how do I open this up more? Because otherwise you can send everybody an employee survey, but if half your workforce is never really going to tell you, because that's their background, would be never to speak up, don't complain, you keep your head down, keep working, then they're never going to tell you if they're having problems or difficulties in the workplace, whether it's through recruitment or anything, right? So it's trying to break down some of those things and being aware yourself, and then making sure that others are aware of that too. And I think there's probably a couple of things when, like in the interview techniques, I would say to people is take the time to try to understand. So this is why, like, when we're going to do an interview or something, I will say it is a competency-based interview, or it's going to be one of these, so that then that person has got the time to go and find out what does that mean. Because, not everybody knows what a competence-based interview is, or what does it mean when I'm going to ask them to give me examples, because they might not know how to do the example. And so then I'll say, we're going to use STAR. So, give them a model that they can frame their answers around, which makes it a lot easier for people then, right? Because now they know that it's going to be situation, task, action and result. So they know that. So then when they come to the interview, at least they've got the time to think about some examples, and I think that helps a little bit because, and that's for anybody, right? I think that would help. I've definitely seen the difference when started explaining that up front, and then when, especially I think for Asian women when they're coming from, then I do find that they're more confident and they're able to not get lost in their CV, but actually they know what they want to talk to me about, if that makes sense. It's a bit easier for them. You can see that it's helped that situation a little bit. And I think, trying to make people feel at ease up front is a good thing. And especially if they come through recruitment agencies, I think recruitment agencies could help individuals, help them understand the business, what is the company that I'm sending you for this role for, because they can help prep them a lot more. I think that's been the other one that I've definitely seen where they've come through an agency. If the agency hasn't really told them a lot about it, and they kind of, and so then I'll say, so what's your understanding of the role? They kind of really don't know what to say about what the role is.
Mm.
And so then when they talk about what their skill set is, because they don't understand the role, it's really hard, right? So how are you meant to apply it? So I think there's a number of things in that can be done differently. I think I'm not sure how we tackle the one where, that there's clearly a cultural kind of difference in the way that, I've noticed they're shyer, they don't raise questions, don't necessarily complain. They feel really bad if they say that they're unhappy with something. And it's how do you change that? And that one is the way that I try to deal with it at the moment, is try to get to know people and try to then, make them feel more comfortable. And then I will constantly say, I'm open to your ideas. This is a two-way culture, open to you telling me, I don't know all the answers, so happy for you to challenge me, or if you think I'm in the wrong, to tell me. If you've got questions, don't feel shy that you can't ask. And sometimes I'll be like, so what do you think? Not deliberately try and bring people in, because the same people will always speak otherwise.
Yeah, like you also mentioned some time back that in the forums where you have presented, there are women of color who have approached you to talk to you and stuff. So do you mentor any women or women of color, or do you support them? And if you do, are there any specific strategies that you adopt? Now, in this conversation, we sort of identified that, yeah, there are some cultural differences which makes it more difficult. But how do you mentor them? Like what strategies do you adopt?
So I think because everybody's needs are a little bit different, for me, depends on the challenge that they've got. So for some, it has been around, I can't progress. I can't progress in the field that I'm in. And I don't know what else to do. And some of that is then trying to actually unpack that a little bit with them around, what exactly is it that you want to go to? What is the next role that you're trying to get to? What do you think the challenges are? And it could be, sometimes it's the organization, that those opportunities are not coming up in that organization. So therefore you do need to kind of think, what other organizations could I look at that, have got the roles that I want? Some of it is around their confidence, that they look at these roles and they don't think that they can do them because they don't meet all of the requirements on the advertisement. But I'm not being funny. Nobody meets all of the requirements on any advertisement. And an organization that is genuinely only going to employ somebody who meets like 100% of something is probably not the right organization, because you're not going to grow and learn and develop there then, clearly. Because you can already do that. So why would I go and do something that I can already do? You want to do something that you can't do, that you will learn at, and you can take a lot of skills to it. So you have a toolkit of stuff, but there's still room to grow. And they, as an organization, should want the same. If they don't want that, then it's probably not the right organization, is what I tell people over and over again. I would not want to work there, would you? Like, you have to ask yourself that question. If that genuinely is how they're going to approach it, then you don't want to work there. But the other thing is having the confidence, pushing a little bit and working with the confidence. Confidence is a big part of it. And that's what I've definitely found. So some of the techniques that I kind of tend to use is I adapt based on the individual. So for some of the people that I have mentored in the past, it's been very specific to work. So they've got a work problem, they've come to me and we've talked about strategies either around things with their manager, or it could be around an actual task and not sure how to get approval or buy-in from an internal stakeholders. In other situations, it's been very much around my career, like I can't get ahead. And so then we talk about, you know, what I've done. I give some suggestions. Usually I would give them suggestions around the things that they could do. So having a mentor internally is also a good thing. Having an external one is also great, because external means that you can tell them everything, and you can actually be a bit more honest about how you're feeling, whereas internal means it's going to be around the work. They're there to help you open doors. They're there to kind of be an advocate for you at those senior levels. And that is really kind of what you need in those early stages. And I think the other thing for women of colour, I think in particular, for the ones that I have been working with, a lot of it is stemming down to confidence, if I'm 100% honest. Confidence to speak up, confidence to know that they know their stuff, you know, like they're skilled, they're capable, they can absolutely do it. And I don't know, some of that is also, I think, you know, there's a lot of attention in South Asian families on their sons versus their daughters in some houses, right? Like, I think I was quite lucky in ours, there was 3 girls. So, you know, there was a lot of focus for all of us to get educated and stuff. And across our family, there's kind of a little bit more of a balance, but you do see it, you know, there is a real difference. And so that's why you can see that the women don't necessarily have, because they've never had that encouragement to go, you're really good at that. And so they're always looking for somebody to say, what have I done wrong? That's the expectation is, oh, you want to talk to me, so have I done something wrong? Whereas actually, if you want to talk to somebody and you just want to tell them how great a job they've done, probably not something they've heard a huge amount of.
Yeah, I think that's very true. That's so true. Like, we don't necessarily hear a lot about what we have done right. And I think it's just so culturally ingrained, right? When someone talks to us, either at home or at school or at university or in relationships, it's always about something that's not right. Yeah. So now you are in a senior leadership role. Very few women of color make it to that sort of role in senior leadership. We don't really see many of us in those senior leadership roles. So what happens to people like me who don't have accents like yours? What do we do?
I think it's also us. We have to not think about our colour too much. We spend a lot of time trying to actually going, oh, we're women of colour. I don't spend a lot of time thinking I'm a woman of colour. I spend a lot of time thinking, I want that and I'm going to go get it. And why would I not get it? Why should I not get it? There is no reason why you shouldn't get it. You should. And the other thing that I think I would say to people, because I know a lot of women that are rising up at the moment, and they don't all have the same, you know, a UK accent type thing, but they are doing really well. You know, they're at head of level, they're doing pretty well for themselves. And those will be their next roles. And the reason for that is because they're pushing down boundaries. They're pushing down those rules themselves a little bit too. And this is why I was saying to you about the confidence. We have to build the confidence. We have to build this confidence in ourselves that we deserve to be there, and that our skills and our experience and the right organization, we will get there. Because the first time I got to a senior level role, I was the first person of color at that table. I don't even think they've had anyone before me. And then when I sat with the board, again, I was the only person of color at that table. So then the way I look at that is I have a responsibility to make sure that I'm a voice that is broader than just mine. I need to make sure it's a voice that is more inclusive. It remembers to bring others in. So then this is why I say to you, I always look at people's skills and experience, because if you look at people's skills and experience, you actually end up with a gender diverse team and a culturally diverse team. And I think at Westpac, you'll probably remember we did that unconscious bias course. And it was actually a very good course when you actually looked at what they wanted everybody in the organization to have. And I think it's really important because it was about pointing out the things that people don't think is a bias and making you self-aware of your own biases, but then also, what does that do? So it's about being that kind of cultural voice for not just one particular community, but actually it's about all of us. And it's how do we get more people here? And some of that is early education as well. There's a real push to get people into the right to give that courage and encouragement from a very young age all the way through. But then once they're in the workforce, it's how do we make sure that we, monitor that and help people, take them and find people that have got that potential. Not everybody wants to do the same, right? Not everybody wants to rise up a ladder, and that's fine too. The other thing that I will say though, Meena, is that it's really interesting being a person of color and getting to this level, because you know what? There's a lot of people that, like my family is obviously incredibly proud, but if I talk to people in my community, if anybody ever says to me, any of the people of kind of South Asian background, they ask me what I do, they have no idea. So I can tell them, and actually that's not important to them. What I do and how, and this actually annoys me probably more, is because, we fight really hard to build a career, and actually it's devalued by the communities that we live in. Because if a guy got that job that I had, they'd be super proud of him. Everybody would be talking about it, I'm sure of it. But I do it, and it's kind of like just not that recognized. And why is that? That's because the measurement for a woman in our communities is not our career. It is if you're married, if you have children, and that is pretty much what they measure your life on. And so if I'm honest with you, sometimes we get more discrimination in our own communities that actually don't necessarily push us to be better. And so we've got this double whammy coming at us. And this is why I spend a lot of time with the women that I mentor, is around building that confidence. Your life should not be determined by other people's measure of how great or bad you are and what you are. It's your worth that is important. So what's important to me is, I stand on my own 2 feet. I am educated. I've got a good career. So everything else is a plus, plus, plus. Whereas they disregard those things first and foremost.
Very well said, Kirti. But there's one more thing though, like, as you mentioned, like women are being judged, right? The judgment criteria is quite different. When I came, so we're in India, I grew up in India, and at home, I've always seen my mom uh, take care of the cooking,
Yeah,
take care of the kids, whereas my dad's main responsibility was to go out to work, earn money, do other things, which was more like a front end representation, right? So he was more like the public relations officer, whereas my mom was behind the scenes doing everything else. But then when I moved to New Zealand in my early stages, I was living with my godparents who were Kiwis, and nothing actually changed much there. Even there, like my godfather used to work, he had a day job. He would go to work, come back in the evening. He will turn on the TV one 6 o'clock news and sit in front of the TV and watch TV, complain about what's going on around the world, and then watch sports or something, and at times fall asleep in front of the TV. Whereas with my godmother, she was working full time, and she would come back from work, organize the dinner for the family, and then get everything cleaned up. And then she would probably go for some grocery shopping, or she would have other projects that she could be working on. And she had all of these other things. It was just, I just felt like even though I moved countries, even though I was in a completely different culture, living in with a Kiwi family, certain stereotypes were just taken for granted. Like this is a man's role, this is a woman's role, right? So I feel that stereotypes are so deeply ingrained that even now, unfortunately, as you said, a woman's success is defined a little bit different to a man's success.
I completely agree with you. And I hear exactly what you're saying because I think it's so true. I think we all do it, right? We work, we come home, we're still cooking and cleaning and doing whatever, in our homes. And actually, you're right, it's still defined as women's roles. And it is changing. There are a lot of men that are now staying at home. And actually, recently I did hear of somebody actually saying to me that once she's had a baby, she'll be at home for the first 6 months, and then her husband's going to be at home for 6 months. And that's how they're doing the first year. Fantastic. How many people do you hear of that? Not many. I think it's great. And I think so. I'm hoping, that will change with time. But you're right. It doesn't matter where they are. I think if women have had more and more things added on. So once we kind of maybe we wanted to work, and we've had to fight to be able to do all the things that we're doing today, right? But it's come with nothing actually being taken off. So we're still doing all the stuff that we were doing before, and now we're also working. And so, it just shows how strong women are and how much we can actually do, because we do a hell of a lot. I do think that some men are now starting to change their mindsets. And I think the younger generation definitely, you can see in the younger generation, it's quite different. They're a little bit more versatile, and, boys and girls are kind of doing different jobs, like, and that's changing now. You can see some of that. But I do think, I agree with you. I think it's not all, it's one of these things that has been defined, that women do all these things, and therefore it's an expectation that we will continue to do all of that. And if you want to have a career, then you can do that on top.
Yeah.
Not an instead, which is the choice that men get. For us, it's on top. It's, oh, okay, you want to do that as well. You can do it on top of all of this other stuff that we're expecting you to do, but you can do that as well. Whereas I guess they have much more choice in that than we do. So yeah, I don't know what the answer to it is. I think it will change. And I think it's also down to us. I've got a lot of friends, and I think when I think of, they've got to change it for their children. You've got to raise your boys differently then. Raise them to be the men that that you know the future's going to be better for them. Make sure that they can cook, clean, do their stuff, and that they don't see that this is all your job, you know, and that have positive male role models so that we do change it for the next generations, because it can be different and it should be different, you know, where, you know, men and women are they're sharing that workload. I actually read a really good article today, and it talked about how you know, there was ways to kind of take out the gender of housework. I think it's on the BBC website. It was quite a good article around, you know, how to kind of help, because it's still happening today, right? So how do you change that in your home, and try to start to bring up that conversation with your partner who may have come from a background where the women in their house did everything and they didn't have to do anything in that sense. They didn't have to help out. And the kind of things they helped out with might be like DIY, or, you know, the things that would be classed as masculine or a bit more male orientated type work, versus what they might not do is put the washing on, or do the ironing. But what they might do is, you know, mow the lawn. Do you see what I mean? So that it's kind of like even housework has turned into becoming quite gender specific, and it doesn't actually need to be. So it's having those conversations with our partners, and you know, having that conversation to change it, but also I think, you know, for the future generations, because we can only change this if we're all changing it for the future generations. As much as, I mean, we're not going to change our parents and grandparents now. That, I mean, to be honest, that year is gone. They're not going to change now. We can't change them, but we can definitely change what we're doing, and then for the future generations. And then in workplaces, so somebody once said to me, never, she learned this, she was working in the insurance business, and she said she goes into meetings and she will never be the person that offers tea, coffee, or water. So if she's having a meeting with externals, with other people from her organization, she won't be the person that says it, and she won't be the one that goes to get it. And she said the reason for that is it's a real male dominated sector, and if I started doing that, they would start to make me do that all the time. So she never did it, and it was always one of them that would go and get the water, set up the meeting. She never did. And she says she deliberately doesn't do it because it sets the scene that's her role. And I thought, wow, that's because it's a natural thing, I think. I know that I go into meetings sometimes and I'll be like, oh, let me just go get the water and I'll get some glasses, especially if it's external. It's just, I see it more as hospitality, but actually you roll that back. In some places, in having worked in insurance, I can fully see how that sooner or later would become your job. Like it would have become my job in that sector as well. So after she told me that, I never did it. I never took the water in. And it was a real, because she said to me, if you start that will be something that they will ask you to go get it in the future, or they'll get you to go and take the tea order. And I was like, oh, right, okay, no. So I never did.
That's very interesting. Now, looking back at your career, what are you most proud of, and what legacy do you hope to leave in the tech industry?
Oh, God. I think I'm probably the most proud. Oh, God, there's been a few proud moments. I'd say when I got my first C-level role, I was 38. And that was a very, very proud moment for me. So I was under 40 and I'd got to that level, and I was really chuffed with getting to that first role. And I just, yeah, I was just not just, I think it felt like all that work was worth it. Like the long hours and the dedication to wanting to be somewhere was, you know, kind of felt like it was worth it. I would say that was a real proud moment for me. I think the other proud moments for me have been when I've built high performing teams, and then I've watched them go on to some amazing things. And I'd say, like, I think my legacy is going to be in all the people that I've had the privilege of having in my team, learning from, and also watching them grow their careers. And not just in New Zealand, like some of them have gone abroad and they've gone on to great roles. And having watched other women as well, of all backgrounds, really, really push their way into the tech space. And I feel super proud of that, that's part of a legacy of kind of knowing that you've passed something on to others, and they're now going to go on and make such a big difference, that's going to empower other people, and they're going to hopefully will lead really successful teams, and take on board any of the feedback over the years and the coaching that I've given, but also find others that give them huge amounts of new learning and new skills and new advice, to help them further their careers. I think that's really big for me. I think when I look back at, yes, I've done huge system integrations and all of those things, and really like paved the way in terms of technology. When I think of some of the stuff, like I've been really grateful for the opportunities that I've had. Like I've been able to implement and leave things that I know that people could use for many years to come, in my career. But in reality, that's still stuff. The real legacy for me is all the people that I have worked with over the years that I've been privileged enough to have in my team, that I've been able to lead. I think that for me is the biggest achievement that I can have, is watching them now grow their careers. And it's in tech, I think it's, especially somebody who's not tech, if that makes sense, I think that has probably been the biggest thing that I feel like I've given back, is maybe helping them to realize you don't have to, your career can be broader than just the technical.
Yeah. Great, Kirti. I just so enjoyed talking to you, and I wish we could continue for even longer. I'm just a bit conscious about the time, and I'm sure we're going to have more conversation. I would really love to continue our conversation again in future. And today, my main key takeaway was how beautifully you just put it across that you just forget about your gender, you just forget about your color, just set your ambitions, set a clear expectation on where you want to go and just work towards it, right? I think a lot of the times it is us being too conscious about our gender or about our color can itself be a barrier.
Yeah.
It's like just realizing, okay, this is what I want to achieve, and I am going to get to it no matter what. And you are a living example of that. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Anything else? Last few words from you.
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope that this can help others, in whichever way it does, for their careers, for their future, and just don't limit yourself. The only person limiting you is you. So if you don't limit yourself, then you can achieve whatever you actually want to achieve, because it starts with you.
Great.
That would be my last takeaway.
Great. Thank you, Kirti. Thanks so much for your time. I'm looking forward to talking to you again in near future.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.